side for the South Australian election, which is coming up in a couple of days. So, just for some background, Australia has a federal parliament and then it has a bunch of state parliaments, and South Australia is one of those states. In Australia, there is traditionally a sort of two party system with a centre right Liberal Party represented by blue here and a centre left Labour Party represented by red. So let's walk into what's happening. So the context is that at the last election in 2022, the Liberals lost a whole lot of seats when they were in government, meaning Labour were able to get in with a majority. And if we just see here, we see a bunch of massive swings for the Labour Party with, some independents in there as well. So let's look into what we think is going to happen this election. Now, at the last election, there was a big swing to Labour, and the polls are showing Labour could do that again, at least in a two-party count, which is quite rare considering they had such a big swing at the last election. So, just so you know, in Australia, we have preferential voting. So, first you put the party you want to win the seat most. We have single member districts here. And then you number all the other candidates in the order you want them. So, eventually, in all seats, there's a final count between two candidates. Whoever wins the most out of that wins the seat. But if we're looking at polling generally, the Labour and Liberal parties I mentioned, they've both gone down in the polls. Labour's lost about 2%, even though they've been somewhat popular in government, to the more left-wing Greens. So for those of you who don't know, they are originally an environmentalist party, which has since taken on more broader progressive stances as they've grown more popular. But the Liberals have lost a huge percentage of the vote. If this comes true, that means they get about half the votes they did at last election. Where will that go? Well, that will go to One Nation, which is a right-wing populist party which has seen limited influence all over the country, but now does seem to be gaining some polling traction. And there is a sizable group of others. This is mostly independents. It says down by 2%. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that because it's quite hard to poll this group because not every seat is an independent. So when we get to a final count between two parties, if it's Labour versus Liberal, on its own, that's another massive swing showing how Labour really is probably going to get a landslide this election, and Labour versus One Nation, it seems very similar. So let's get into how we think the seats are going to go. So I'm going to put on this map all the seats I think the parties are going to win, and then if they're in a darker shade, like if I put Liberal like this, that means I think they'll hold the seat. If I put it like this, that's the darker shade. That means they don't hold the seat, but I think they're going to gain it. In the meantime, I have filled in almost every single seat Labour holds, and that's because I'm predicting now they will win the election. This isn't to say I'm calling these seats before counting starts, but yeah, it's pretty likely all of these seats will be going to a Labour Party. They're gonna win a landslide victory, that is for sure. However, now I'm gonna go through the rest of the seats and see which way I think they might be leaning. Okay, so first let's talk about the currently Labour held seat of Dunstan. So this is currently Labour held. It was Liberals at the last election, but the MP resigned, meaning there's a by-election, which is like a special election, if that makes sense. It's to fill in the position of a retiring MP. I think in the US they're called special elections. So yeah, Dunstan was a seat which had been with Liberals for a long time, just narrowly switched to Labour. I suppose the question is maybe it could swing back, but with a statewide swing towards Labour, I don't think that's going to happen. And then we're going to look at the seat of Black. It's very much the same. We're going to colour that in red. I think it went to Labour stronger at the by-election than Dunstan did. So yeah, I do predict those seats will go to Labour. I'm just not 100% sure. That brings them up to 29. So now, what else are we going to look at? So there's a lot of seats which were marginal at the last election. uh, we're gonna go for a few of them that are marginal between Liberal and Labour. So Morialta is a seat which the Liberals won 51 to 49 at last election. I think that's going to be an easy pickup for Labour. The seat of uh, Hartley, yes. That was also Liberals at the last election. I think that is going to flip quite easily. There's a lot of seats in sort of outer-ish Adelaide, which I think are going to be quite easy flips. If we just bring up, yeah, which are going to be quite easy flips. Then we're going to go to the seat of Morfett. Again, Liberal at the last election. I think it went Liberal 55 to 45. Labour's going to flip that narrowly. I feel like the swing is going to be a lot more pronounced in and around Adelaide than in the rest of the state. And then the seat of Colton, I think Morfett and Colton are going to be quite close, but I think Labour will pick that up as well. So if I'm reading through more of the rest of the seats, I did say Morialta's going to be a flip, right? Yeah, I did say Morialta's going to be a flip. So there already you have Labour on 33 seats, with the other 14 I haven't given to anyone yet. So first, before we get into the whole Liberal versus One Nation versus Independence thing, I want to talk about two seats, and these are the seats of Hyson and Unley. So they are both Liberal held seats. In the last election, the final contest was Liberal versus Labour. Hyson is big compared to the rest of Adelaide seat here, which you can just see, and Unley I think is a little bit further in. So those seats do have quite a high percentage of the Greens vote. So that's why I'm not necessarily saying they'll go to Labour, because the Greens seem to be running a strong campaign in both of them. So there's a chance that the Greens do leapfrog Labour, and if it is a Greens versus Liberal count, the Greens should win because the majority of Labour voters tend to preference Greens over Liberal when it's a Greens versus Liberal count. If it ends up Greens versus Labour, I think the Liberal voters will probably preference Labour ahead of the more left-wing Greens, which would keep the Greens out of those seats. So, but it's going to be hard to predict. I think the Greens have gained a bit of traction in recent weeks, so I'm going to split them. I think Hyson, with a generally stronger Greens campaign and stronger past vote, will flip. So that will be a Greens gain of the Liberals. It will be a first time the Greens are in the House of Representatives or the lower house in South Australia. Meanwhile, if we go to Unley, I think the Greens will have a strong vote there. I don't think they'll necessarily overtake Labour, so we're going to put that as a Labour flip getting from the Liberals. And now we're going into seats which might be a little bit more difficult to predict. So first, we're going to bring up, I think it's called Gadgerrie. So this is a seat which went to the Liberals narrowly at the last election. One Nation does seem to be gaining support in more of the rural seats. Currently, most predictions have it very close on first preferences. Three-way race between One Nation, Liberal, and Labour. It's really hard to predict. You'd think two Conservatives versus one non-Conservative. One of the Conservatives will win. Question is Liberal or Labour, but Labour does seem to be polling decently. I just think they can't quite get the victory. Generally, with the support for One Nation in the rural areas, you'd think they would gain. I think the Liberals are not particularly strong here. Well, wait to see if they get over the line, but I think the Liberal lead in Gadgerrie is probably just going to be enough for them to hold on. So that's actually a first seat I'm giving to them. They're not doing too well. Then we're going to go to the seat of Hammond. So again, the Liberals narrowly won against, not narrowly, they won by not a huge margin against Labour at the last election. Hammond. Uh, I don't think the seat might have not existed at last election because a lot of them have been redrawn. So what they do is to predict how it would have gone is they take results from the voting booths and then see what has changed. So currently, there seems to be a three horse race here between One Nation, an Independent, and a Liberal. Currently, it looks like One Nation and the Independent are polling first and second. Generally, it seems that the Independent will get more support as our more sort of moderate centre right, centre left, as opposed to One Nation, which almost completely appeals to the populist right. So I feel like Hammond, there seems to be a strong independent. Haven't heard too much about a campaign. Always hard to predict independent votes. I think that's going to be narrow. Liberals could win it. I think even Labour could win it. It's not going to be easy. It'll be very close between the Independent and One Nation, but I feel like that seat does flip and go to the Independent. I think it'll flip very likely. Question is, Independent or One Nation. Then we're going to the seat of Finis, which I think might be Independent held already, but the Independent is retiring. That's going to be close in the first preference between Liberal and the Independent. Maybe One Nation could get in there, but I feel like the Labour support for the Independent candidate and generally the cross candidate support. We also see One Nation, a populist party, doesn't necessarily stick to preferencing the centre right, or now more right wing Liberals, over Labour or over a moderate independent. So I feel like the independent will do well there. I don't know whether that's already regarded as an independent seat, whether I'd say it's a flip. Yeah, I'd say that is a flip. And the independent flips that. I think it's currently held by the Liberals. Then what else are we going to look at? There's a few more seats, 9 seats left to be decided. Now, this one, Bragg, will be interesting. I haven't already assigned Bragg. Okay, so Bragg is that seat in sort of Eastern Adelaide. That's the only real seat I'd call like somewhat in the city Adelaide, or semi urban Adelaide, or suburban Adelaide, that the Liberals could win. They won the seat 58-42 at the last election. On the statewide swing, the Liberals would hold that, but I feel like the Liberals are not gonna do as well with the swing in the city as they are further out. Generally, most projections have this 50-50. I don't know whether the Liberals are going to perform as badly at the election as they do in the polls. One Nation tends to do better in the rural areas, so maybe there isn't that swing away from the Liberals. Then again, maybe it just means a lot more anti-establishment voters. What One Nation would regard as anti-establishment voters just go a bit of everywhere. So maybe I'll go more to Labour. I feel like Labour will win Bragg very narrowly. They will flip that. That will be one of the really close ones this election. So where do we go to next? Schubert. Schubert is currently a decently safe seat. The Liberals won at 62 38 at the last election against Labour, and that's the seat of the Liberal leader Ashton Hearn. So parties here have leaders. If that party is to form government, then that would be the Premier, who's essentially a top member of cabinet in the state. Of course, for the Liberals now they're in opposition, so Ashton Hearn is leader of the opposition. Now her seat's going to be interesting because there's a chance that in a Liberal versus Labour contest, that seat could flip, but that margin just seems a little bit big. I wouldn't be quite sure. However, One Nation is polling very well. It looks like Liberals will probably come first, followed by One Nation, followed by Labour. And the question is, where do preferences flow? Labour and Greens, which are polling decently high, they will generally preference for more centre right Liberals in front of a right wing right wing populist One Nation. Just so you know, in Australia, you can preference whoever you want, but parties tend to recommend a way of voting, and even when they don't, their voters tend to lean a certain way over another. I feel like the the Liberal candidate Ashton Hearn will probably win this by a fair margin against One Nation. If it's against Labour, maybe it'll be closer, but I feel like the seat of Schubert, which is, outside of Adelaide, but not far, will narrowly stay with the Liberal Party, but it is going to be close. Now we go to the seat of Mount Gambier. So Mount Gambier is way in the south of the state. There is an independent there who is retiring. Now there's another independent running who is quite popular. So it seems to be a very close four-party competition between Labour, the Independent, the Liberal, and One Nation as to who will finish first in the first preference vote. I think, look, just for polling I've seen come out of Mount Gambier, it had the Independent doing quite well. It's the only seat I think where there's been publicly available individual seat polling. And look, the Independent, whether they're against the Liberal or whether they're against Labour or whether they be against One Nation, they'll probably get the support of most of the preferences from all the other parties which get knocked out of the count. So I do think that will be very interesting to watch. I feel like the Independent wins that. I'm putting that as hold because the current holder of that seat is an Independent. However, well, actually, that person resigned, but they resigned close enough to this election that there wasn't an election to fill the seat. I'm not putting that as a flip because it's still independent, but it's a different independent. Which, yeah, maybe I should put as this flip, but then they're flipping off which party. They're flipping the seat off which party. So, yeah. Chaffey. So, Chaffey is, I think, one of these quite rural seats. It's not full on outback, but it's pretty close. So the Liberals won this in a massive margin at last election against, I think, maybe an independent or Labour. I don't quite remember. Uh, so yeah, this is going to be close in the first preference count between Liberal and One Nation. I think One Nation might actually win the first preference count. Most people, as it is sort of a tie. But I feel like, again, that's sort of centre left vote of Labour and the Greens put together. We'll probably prefer the Liberals, so unless One Nation takes a huge lead on first preferences, which they might, but I don't think it's going to be huge, I think that seat does stay with the Liberals. So they will retain that. See, all of our seats seem to be in one area so far. Now we're going to talk about, I think there's 5 more seats. The seat of Flinders? Okay, so the seat of Flinders. This was a very safe seat for Liberals at last election if you look at Liberal versus Labour. But that's when there's an independent, and the independent actually ran it quite close, I believe. There is an independent running at this election, but I don't know if they have the same support. This seat is looking Liberal versus One Nation versus maybe the independent. One Nation probably isn't favoured unless they're getting like 30-40% of first preference vote, which they could do, but I don't think that's likely. I could say the independents favoured. I'm not quite going to put that there for now. But One Nation is surging in rural areas, but I feel like that's a narrow hold for the Liberal Party against One Nation. Then again, as strong independent, who knows when they get an count, if they get in the final count, who knows which way that seat's going to go. Now, MacKillop is a seat which was a Liberal Party held, but then Liberal MP left the party. He declared himself an independent and is not running for re-election. I know he is running for re-election, but he has had a lot of scandals. Um, it's estimated the Liberals will probably win the first preference vote, and there'll be a competition between One Nation and then the former Liberal Independent as to who wins that. That's going to be interesting to watch. Uh, the Independent, here's the thing, it's not like most seats where the Independent scene is more moderate than the Liberals or One Nation. This MP, this was a former Liberal Party member. I feel like, maybe the small centre left vote that is there won't necessarily flow to him. I think the Liberals, if it's Liberals versus One Nation, the Liberals win that. If it's Liberals versus the Independent, who honestly knows? Comes down to who One Nation preferences. I feel like, yeah, this will be narrow between the Liberal and the Independent, or the Liberal Party and One Nation. But I feel like, maybe the Liberal just has, a little bit more support. So I think the Liberals do probably hold the seat of MacKillop, but it's going to be close. You should not be losing seats which are that's safe for you. So Stewart is currently held by an independent. That independent will probably win because it'll either be the independent versus One Nation, because One Nation and Labour are close for second. If it's the independent versus One Nation, Labour preferences will go to the independent, and if it's the independent versus Labour, you'd think most One Nation preferences will probably go to the independent, and the independent candidate is projected to get somewhere in the mid 30s% of support, whereas One Nation versus Labour, One Nation and Labour are both in the sort of low 20s. So I feel like Stewart will be a decently firm hold for the current independent. And Noronga, I have two seats not selected here. Oh, wait, before I get to Noronga, the seat of Hartley, there's a small seat which I haven't filled in yet. Hartley, where's Hartley? Is Hartley still here? Yeah, okay, Hartley. So that seat is held by someone who was actually the leader of the Liberal Party before Ashton Hearn, who resigned. Labour's polling ahead of Liberal in first preference, or at least, on some of the prediction sites I'm looking at, there hasn't been any publicly available polling. Generally, look, the Liberals won that 54 to 46 at last election. Uniform swing at flips, and it's in Adelaide. I think it flips. It's going to be narrow. No, I have entered Hartley. Then what's the seat I haven't accounted for? There's okay. That's strange. But anyway, so we're gonna have a look at Noronga. That is this one, which goes onto the peninsula here. Noronga. So there's currently an independent. I think that independent left. Well, that was interesting. I think that independent left the Liberal Party. I could be wrong. So we'll see which way that's going to go. That should stay with the independent. No, they're polling quite well. Labour, Liberal, One Nation, all fighting over second. You'd think whoever it is, there'll be enough support for the independent just to remain in office, although we don't really know how that'll go. There's this one seat. What is this one seat? Who holds this one seat I haven't accounted for? Something's up. Stupid. MacKillop? Is that the one? No, I've accounted for MacKillop. Okay, I don't know who holds that seat, but the Liberals, in most of my predictions, have not been getting up to 5 seats. So I think I'd just colour that seat in for Labour. I think they already hold it. No, I'll put it as a flip, just in case. Yeah, because Labour currently holds 29 seats. Okay, so that's my prediction. Despite the polling boom, One Nation, I don't think of a favourites in any seats at the moment. But, there's a chance they probably get one or two. I think there's a couple here which Liberals could really falter in. It's going to be strong independence. And for the first time ever, the Greens will get into Parliament. So that'll be quite interesting for them. However, the big story is Labour will probably walk away with quite a big majority. It'll be quite a big landslide, and that will be one for the record books. I've got here them getting, uh, I can't really do a quick count or anything, but I think getting 3/4 of the seats in Parliament, which will be interesting to watch. And look, most of these seats, some of the flips that Labour is getting are decently marginal. There's, of course, strong Greens and independent vote in some places. Then again, some of these Liberal seats could go to Labour. And, One Nation's close in a lot. Independents are all over the place. We don't really know. So, yeah, I probably won't be doing any coverage of the election. Maybe I'll do some stuff on Instagram, so go follow that. But yeah, alright, we'll see how everything goes down.